Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. This is the second video on the Mavericks, which is the game that we're running using a very heavily modified version of Champions Now. Champions Now, of course, is the superhero role-playing game written by Ron Edwards and published by Hero Games. And today we are going to talk about the characters that my players created. If you recall, the last video I ended on the first of the steps involved in setting up a Champions Now game, and that is the two statements. The two statements that I crafted to kick off this game were, number one, powers hit hard and the action is fast and furious, and number two, outsiders are organizing and insiders don't like it in Chicago, Illinois. So those are the two statements I gave to my players, along with a three-corner worksheet. And today we're going to talk about the brainstorming process that they engaged in when they filled out those three-corner worksheets, and then the actual hero sheets that they created when they built their characters with points. The first character up is Siphon, made by Lauren. If we take a look at her three-corner sheet, you'll see that it was actually a very basic, very simple concept sketch. For powers, she put that she wanted kind of an energy vampire, basically the ability to drain people's emotions and therefore weaken them. And she also said that she wanted some type of 1980s or 1990s style quote-unquote vampire powers. And she put kind of like in the Lost Boys for that category. For the person corner, she just put that she wanted a goth girl who had a problem with her mom being a drug addict, and that she was kind of an outsider type as a consequence, not really socialized and kind of trying to make ends meet and kind of dark, right? So as you see, by working in the person corner, we did generate some of her problems, right? And specifically that she has a mom who is a drug addict, and therefore that's going to get in her personal life, which could affect her superhero career. So if we go over to the problem section, all that Lauren put for that was the situation with her mother, and the need to have emotions, to drain emotions in order to survive. And she also put that she felt like there was some sort of religious zealot kind of organization kind of after her in some form or fashion. We haven't specified what that is yet, but that appeared in the corner. So this three-corner sheet, again, very quick. She did this like in 5 minutes, or maybe even less. It was just a very quick brainstorm. And had I seen this three-corner sheet at an earlier time, I might have said this isn't enough. But this time around, I was a lot more casual about it. I'm like, great, perfect, let's get to building the character. Now let's take a look at how that stuff on the three-corner sheet made its way over into Siphon's hero sheet. There it is. So you'll see that in the situations, the very little that was put on the three-corner sheet made its way here. It was more than enough, right? So she has a dependence on strong emotions. So if she's isolated from people, let's say captured and put in some place where there aren't people around that are feeling kind of strong emotions, she's going to be depleted as a consequence of that, right? So that becomes a dependence on her character sheet. She also has a secret identity. So probably if those religious zealots find out who she is, they're going to be consequences, right? So she's keeping her identity secret. Her mother is a DMPC who is a meth addict, affects her all the time, is severely limiting, and those problems matter to Cassandra Collins, who is Siphon's real name. By the way, Cassandra Collins, she borrowed that. Lauren's a big fan of vampires, so she took the Collins part of that from Dark Shadows, right? Which I thought was kind of fun. We see that she's hunted by those religious zealots. I actually have not nailed down exactly what those guys are like yet. So it appears as religious zealots in the corner in on the sheet here. Pretty soon I will crystallize that into something more specific. She's got a psychological limitation. She's angered by the persecution of outsiders, right? Happens a lot. And stated opinion. She's not irrational about it. So it'll affect the way that the character's played and what the character says and all of that. But it's not going to trigger truly irrational behaviors unless Lauren wants to take Siphon there. And then, as a consequence of having a not very stable family life and a mother that wasn't present, she values family. And so she considers the team her surrogate family and has all that type of loyalty. And for that, she will get irrational about that, right? So again, one of the nice things about that brainstorm, you don't have to have this overwrought kind of set of a background and character profiles and like detailing everything about the character. Just a couple of little phrases will produce a nice robust list of situations that will meet the requirements that you need in order to get your character at the table. In terms of the powers and the skills and the attributes, very modest request from Lauren, right? Like drains emotions and some vampire-y powers. So we went straight to the drains emotions things and what we wanted that to look like and what we wanted that to look like mechanically in the game. And after describing some options, Lauren said that she thought the drain power, the ability to siphon endurance as a resource from those that siphon is draining would be the best way to go. So we bought a drain, we made it ranged, we made it ego based. So it's not something she tags somebody with her hand, but rather it's like an emotional siphon that she's doing, and it is directed. Now, the special effects of the power mean that she is kind of always draining or drawing from people's emotions around her, right? And we're not taught in the play report yet, but I will say that when we got to the table with this character, Lauren was really good about describing like how in most casual of interactions the character is like feeding off of people's emotions around her, right? But that's not something that you nail down with points. That's something that you just describe, and because you have the power, it just is, which means that I have reason to say that when her character's around, people do feel a little more somber and do feel a little bit more like that. And that actually could have in-play effects, but for the most part, it's just a condition of the concept of the character. She doesn't have to pay any points or spend any points to make that happen in play. But when it becomes something that is useful in combat and is directed and is dramatic and we're going to nail it down so that it has a consistent effect every time, that's when we defined it as psychic vampirism, which is a drain attack of 4d6. I'll have more to say about this when I reflect in play, but this is how we defined it at this point. With that, I remember when we were making the character, we jumped over to the characteristics from that point on. That was the only power we had for a little while. We jumped over to characteristics. She wanted Siphon to be strong enough, she said, to pick up a man, like a big man, and throw them, right? Kind of like Buffy strong, right? So we did a 4d6 strength. But the other thing that was important about the psychic vampirism is that she wanted the effect of when she does drain, she becomes stronger. So toward that end, you'll see here that we assigned an additional 4 dice of strength for the characters. So that means that when Siphon is at her strongest, when she's primed to her peak, she is kind of lifting the equivalent of a bus over her head. She has that potential. This takes her into the realm of like Spider-Man level activity, right? Which is cool and appropriate for a comic book. And we assign the constrained limitation to it because it is dependent on the use of psychic vampirism. So Siphon will gain 1d6 per core rolled on psychic vampirism. And the other thing is that we decided that after the first phase of use of that strength, it starts to drop by 1 die per phase after that. So that should give us a nice give and take, where the use of the psychic vampirism is something that she'll have to consistently use to maintain levels of strength, and there'll be kind of an up and down that occurs, which should make the whole thing seem consequential. That's the hope. In terms of her other abilities here, she knew she wanted her to be fast, and again, that fits that vampiric kind of ability to be there in the moment, right? Like speed over and act. So she got her a high speed, and Siphon also has a high dexterity, right? Those fit the concept. And then upped her defense to 17, which means she can take a good punch, right? The body's not that high, right? So Siphon can be stunned maybe relatively easily by incoming attacks. But the important things for Lauren were that Siphon have the speed, the resilience in terms of just being able to withstand blows, even if she's stunned while doing it, and the strength. And we got that all nailed down by allocating points in this way. That left us with a few points left over, so we jumped over to defining a few more vampiric things. So flight, like the vampires and Lost Boys, and also vampiric regeneration, because one of the things I pointed out to Lauren is that Siphon has no resistant defense. That means if somebody were to shoot her with bullets or whatever, that she just could go down, right, in that way. But which is fine visually speaking. She wasn't envisioning Siphon as this kind of tank that could just like not feel the effects of bullets, but the idea that regeneration would allow her to recoup, to fall down, but then to recoup the damage that she's taken in the matter of seconds and be back in, that like seemed like chef's kiss in terms of the effects, how we wanted it to look on the page. So very modest 3-corner wish list that easily translated to the page and gave Lauren pretty much the character that she wanted. Again, there are probably some modifications that she'll want to make after the first session of play, but I'll get to that in the next video. Character number 2, Rockpile, made by Mike. Let's take a look at the 3-corner sheet. So in the powers section, you see here lithokinesis, mental control over stone and metal, able to merge into a mass of such material to create a humanoid figure and tunnel through said materials. Not a huge list, right? Pretty tight there in terms of what the ask is. That got a little more interesting and complex when we got to the character generation phase of things. In the person corner, Pete is the character's alias. He is an outsider on the run from insider violence and in disguise. His real name is Adam, and he is from southern Indiana, Illinois, or Ohio. May end up using the code name Gollum. Okay, so that's what he was playing with at the time. And then if we go to the problems section, practice powers in secret with another sibling, cousin, friend. Wasn't sure at the point that he defined this. Powers were discovered and the two were shot. Adam used powers to remove bullets and fled in panic, leaving the other behind for dead. Wants to do the right thing, but is bitter and may be prone to react violently to bigotry. Control over his powers is crude and unrefined. So let's go over to the hero sheet now and take a look at what resulted from the brainstorm. So here is Rockpile's hero sheet. So when we sat down to make Rockpile, to build him with points, we came across a challenge that I hadn't expected from just looking at the brainstorm, right? Looking at the 3-corner sheet. And that is that Mike, in terms of powers, Mike wanted more for a rock pile that was listed there. I mean, I looked at that and I said, I saw some tunneling and the ability to create kind of a golem form, right? But for Mike, when he had put control over, stone and metal, he didn't mean for it just to be the crafting of the form, the golem form that he would use in combat, but he wanted a much broader suite of powers here. And I was wondering if we'd be able to pull this off, because he wanted essentially the ability to lift and throw around metal and stone, so telekinesis, the ability to create walls of stone and metal, so kind of force wall kind of stuff, the ability to burrow, as stated, through both of those materials, the ability to stick to metal and stone surfaces. So there was all of that, and then the addition of the golem form. And I was really thinking this wish list now has suddenly become much bigger. I don't know that the 200 points that characters are built with, starting characters are built with in Champions now, will accommodate that. And then I asked Mike one question. Let me ask you a question. When he becomes the golem, can he use any of his other powers? Mike thought for a moment and said, no, I don't think so. I think that when he uses his powers to create the golem form, he is so focused on maintaining that form that basically all his other powers kind of shut down. I'm like, okay. So that means that we have two different forms. We have the form running around in whatever uniform he ends up wearing or costume he ends up wearing that can do kind of like the Magneto, but with rock and metal kind of stuff. And then we have the golem form that is primed for a multi-form. And I was excited about that because so far I hadn't made or helped make any characters with the multi-form framework, which was one of the options that you have in Champions now. And this is kind of precisely the type of thing that multi-form exists for. I think the temptation for a lot of folks from older versions of Champions coming into Champions now would be say multi-form, oh, that's really a multi-power, so I'm going to use it as just like a framework in the same way that I've used multi-power for all these years. But no, it really actually is more for this kind of thing and doesn't suit earlier uses very well for reasons that I'm not going to get into here. But anyway, here we are building a multi-form. And if you look at the powers, and let's go there first, you'll see that he has the power, we called it lithokinesis. It's a multi-form. We have the human form, so the non-golem form, right? In that one, he has these powers. Burrow through stone and metal. Okay, so that is expressed as the ability, the component tunnel through 6 defense and 6 body. Okay. Control stone and metal, which we went with 8d6 telekinesis on that. And then the ability to stick to stone and metal, which we defined as surfaces 5d6. Okay. Now, he wanted a lot more than that. There were all sorts of effects that we put on the list. Again, the entangle component, the force wall component, the blast component, area effect attacks of various types, all those sorts of things. That's what Mike was hoping to get. But that list, in terms of the points, that list got very, very out of control. And Mike said, okay, let's pare it down to the bare minimum. What the bare minimum was largely decided by how we defined the golem form, right? So you'll see for the golem form, he has the power Stone Giant, which is density increase 2 plus growth 2. Stone Might, which is strength plus 46. And Stone Resilience, which is life support for underwater gases and vacuum kind of environments, right? We basically built that, saw how much it came to in terms of points, and then said, okay, let's balance the other slot, right, by spending that number of points. So when he toggles between these 2 points, there are these different suites of powers that he has. Mike was happy with that. He said, it gives me room to grow, and this captures the essence of it. This is the bare minimum that I need to kind of be happy with the way the character is in terms of the actual effects in play, and it's enough. So now let's go to his characteristics. Something important to state here is that we have two versions of Rockpile's sheet. One that shows his characteristics in his human form, and another one that shows his characteristics in his golem form. They look the same except for the value in that first column of numbers. So if you look at the one in his human form, you'll see that it's slightly elevated from a kind of a regular human. No change to strength and presence, very mild increase to his body. His speed is mildly elevated. His dexterity and his intelligence and his ego are mildly elevated, right? So that's that. But you'll also notice that this version of the character sheet includes certain increases to his body and his defense that are constrained. They have the limitation constrained only when in golem form. Because this is his human form, I didn't include those increases here. But if we click over to his stats as they appear on his golem form sheet, you'll see that I've added them here. So his strength, when factoring in those increases, and also when factoring in the bonuses that he gets from his stone giant power and from his stone might power, which both are under his golem form, you'll see that he ends up with a strength of 8d6, a presence of 4d6, a body of 14, a stunned of 16. You'll see that his ordinary defense jumps to 15. You'll see that his resistant defense jumps up to 5 for a total of 20, right? So that is a much hardier character, and that's what he gets when he's in his golem form. And then if we go up, let's see how that three-corner sheet worked its way into his situations. Enrage in the presence of anti-metahuman violence. Again, he was the direct target of anti-metahuman violence, and he thinks he lost his friend who also had powers. So this is a much more X-Men-y kind of thing, right? Like he is being targeted for his powers, right? You know, his outsider status comes from his from being somebody with powers, whereas it's a little bit different for Siphon, right? Her powers might have something to do with it, but it has a lot to do with the fact that people think that she might be a demon or a devil or something that has to fight for, that people have to fight and put down for religious reasons. You'll notice here that Rockpile is hunted by the Cowboys, right? K-A-H boys. And I'll explain a little bit more about the Cowboys in a moment, because Mike originally had put down hunted by like metahuman activists or something like that, but didn't have it very well defined, which was fine. Again, that's totally fine. But Dan, whose character we'll talk about in a moment, is the one who came up. He had a similar limit situation, and he came up with the Cowboys as a concept. So I'll talk about them later. But the Cowboys here, his identity is secret. He's a dude on the run, so he has a secret identity, and it's a problem if people figure it out. He feels affinity for other metahumans, right? So he's connecting to the other characters in that way, and he was connected to his friend who died in that way. Seeks revenge on the Cowboys, who we've determined are the ones that shot him and his friend and maybe killed his friend, and he's a little bit unlucky. So we have that going on. So again, the three-corner sheet worked its way well into the more specific expressions of those concepts. The one thing that we saw was that not so much on the three-corner sheet, but in terms of what Mike was thinking when he put down the stuff in the powers corner, was that there was an overreach. Not that that's not to be critical, right? But there was a quote unquote overreach in terms of what Mike was hoping to be able to do with the 200 points, but then a way of narrowing that down, which came with a more modest expression of what these powers look like in actual play, with room to grow into what he wanted. But conceptually, the character remained unchanged. It was just kind of like the degree of expression that was a little bit too ambitious, during the brainstorming process. And I don't mean too ambitious in terms of like, one should never be ambitious on these 3-corner sheets, right? That's not what I'm saying. It was a perfectly appropriate 3-corner expression. It's just that this shows us how the process, and the points help us to focus the characters to more of a starting hero kind of formulation in ways that are really, I think, powerful. Character number 3, Puka, made by Dan. So if we go to Puka's 3-corner sheet, we see a lot of ambition here. Okay, a lot of ambition here. For powers, Dan wrote down teleportation, plank control, shape changing, super reflexes, charm, shrinking. And it turned out later that shrinking was not just shrinking, but maybe even growth. Person. Her real name is Sorsha. Her hero name is Puka. She's mischievous. She's small of stature, in her late teens. Maybe she's Scottish, a mystery ancestry. She was a foundling as a child, so she was kind of like, left somewhere and picked up. She was raised in a church or a church-run orphanage at least, and she believes that she is Fae. At this point, then, that is a belief, not necessarily what's actually going to happen, but that's the way Dan put it down on the sheet. And Puka's problems are as follow. She has an aura of otherworldliness. She has elfin characteristics that she can't change. Pointed ears, short of stature, elfin nose, almost unnaturally ice sky blue eyes. She has a reputation for being a prankster. She's got a fiery temper when her families and friends and innocents are harmed. Okay? So a spirited, young, possibly Fae girl with a very broad range of powers. Let's see what that actually ended up looking like on the character sheet. This was a very ambitious range of powers that was requested here. And when we sat down to make the character, I started asking Dan about which ones of these were most important to her, or to him, for her. And it became quickly apparent that the teleportation was. One of his inspirations for the character was Nightcrawler. Another inspiration for the character was Megan from Excalibur. Another inspiration for the character was Magic from the New Mutants. But the primary inspiration was Nightcrawler. So the teleportation was important. And the plant control came in because of fake connection to the environment and all of that. But it was also seemed to be kind of like a special effect of the ability to teleport. Because the way that he envisioned Puka teleporting was that she would shift into the Fae plane and then come out of the Fae plane. And when she'd come out of the Fae plane, like, some of the vegetation from the Fae world might like sprout up around her just because realities are crossing over into one another. And I'm like, you can have that without buying it. That's just a special effect. So if you say that you appear and certain vegetation might appear around you, that just happens. Now, I think Dan also envisioned that maybe she would be able to do more poison ivy-esque kind of things with vegetation, in a more fully evolved version of the character and all of that. But let's face it, what we have here is like almost like multiple power concepts. I don't know about character concepts, but certainly multiple power suites coming over and overlapping in one character. So Dan was going to have to make some choices. And it wasn't too difficult for him to arrive at the choice that he came to, which was that the teleportation was the most important thing. So we decided to build her using an elemental control. And we named that elemental control Fae Travel. She has various different versions of the teleport. We got the Fae Flicker, which is her like popping in and out of the Fae world in a combat situation. We've got Travel the Fae Road, which actually involves her opening a portal that other people can step through and she can take somewhere else. And that has the expanded scope regional range. So she can go basically anywhere in the city she can, travel to using that. And then she's got the face stride. And this one, he wasn't really thinking about this specifically, but when he was going through the options of components in the book and he saw the Escher expression of surfaces, he's like, that is so cool. That would fit. She can see dimensional spaces and see how things cross, and she can basically, any way is up or any way is down kind of thing. So he's like, Escher, something that he got really excited when he saw that component and wanted to attach it to. So we call that face stride. She also has a sensitivity to different kinds of energies and things, right? So awareness, defined as fey sight, the ability to see the unseen, to see dimensional corners and angles as they appear in our world, that kind of thing. So fey sight, awareness, and it has the ability to perceive abstractions. In terms of her characteristics, we see, a high kind of charisma, right? But really, aside from a very high dexterity and a high speed, pretty, close to standard in terms of what you get as a base when you make a Champions Now character. And now let's take a look at her situations. She's enraged when she's in the face of malice and cruelty. That was on the 3-corner sheet, right? That was, if you look at it, right, has fiery temper when her family, friends, and innocents are harmed. So just phrased a little differently, but that was an aspect that Dan had envisioned on the sheet. He narrowed down, or actually added a hunted, thinking more about the fey. Because I think, remember, going into the character creation process, I think Dan was saying, well, she thinks she's fey. She's not sure. And I think what was happening there was that Dan was saying, well, I don't know what this campaign is supposed to be. Are we all supposed to be mutants? If we're all supposed to be mutants, then I don't want to say she's fey right off the bat because it might contradict what the game is supposed to be about. But although this game was inspired by me watching X-Men 97 in some ways, and I made the mistake of communicating that to my players. I should have not revealed the inspiration and just crafted these 2 statements the way that I did. Because remember, I crafted that second of the 2 statements. Outsiders are organizing and insiders don't like it in Chicago, Illinois, because I wanted the outsider-insider dynamic, but I didn't necessarily want to pin it to something as specific as mutants or specific as anything else. So when we were kind of sitting down and making the character and we talked, I think Dan sensed like, oh, like Fey is fair. We've defined the powers as actual Fey travel, so being a Fey is fair game. I don't have to limit myself to, I don't have to be vague about whether or not she's Fey. I can just say she's Fey. And yeah, that's what the brainstorming process, the 3-corner sheet process is supposed to be. You, the player, are supposed to come to me and tell me, look, there are Fey in your world. You didn't know that, did you? But there are Fey in your world. Unless something about my 2 statements like says like all characters must be mutants, which my statement did not say that. Yes, you can just say there are Fey in your world. Deal with it, right? So anyway, sensing that, he came up with a cool hunt that I thought, Archfey Lord Alistair Swift. So there is that hunted up for use. Then this is, again, it was Dan who came up with the Cowboys. Initially, he had, just like Mike, he had a very vague kind of like anti-metahuman group, right? And we made the character, and on both character sheets, it just said that anti-metahuman group, leaving it totally up to me. Now, I was saying, okay, this anti-metahuman group, what will they be like? And I was thinking, all right, I'd like to model them on kind of like the Proud Boys, right? In the sense of like, the kind of MAGA, agitators, kind of like pushing this kind of America first, kind of proud to be an American kind of thing going, and talking about like people with powers not being fully. So I was already kind of going down that road, but I hadn't vocalized that. I hadn't verbalized that. I hadn't told anybody about that. I had that cooking in the back of my mind, but I didn't have a look. I didn't have a name. I didn't have anything like that. And then Dan wrote back and said, hey, why don't we define the people that don't like metahumans as the cowboys? And that the cowboy kind of reference in terms of the way that that's pronounced brings up this whole kind of America, kind of nationalism, kind of tapping into the American mythology of the cowboy and the rugged individual and all of that, right? And cast, the KAH stands for Keep America Human. Keep America Human. I'm like, that's great. I loved it. I sat on it for just a few minutes and I was like, is this too much? I'm like, no, this is perfect. And I can see these guys as like, dressing up with, like their regular standard kind of operatives that go out there and just wave signs and all of that, wearing like red, white, and blue cowboy hats with like, the American flag wrapped around them. Each one could just look a little bit different in terms of kind of pageantry that they have around that. That's kind of like the foot soldier of the cowboys. And then it was up to me to decide whether or not they had superpowers. I think on Dan's sheet, they didn't have, or they did have superpowers, and on Mike's sheet they did not. I immediately said, no, these have to be the same organization. So I said you are also hunted by the cowboys. And then I switched it to say that they did include superpowers, right? And I'll decide as the game master to what degree and in what way. But that solidified a big chunk of what was going to be happening in this game for me. It was a gift that I was given by Dan by coming up with the cowboys. Prejudice, she has that otherworldly quality that other people find unnerving. She has a daughterly attachment to Sister Agnes. We decided that Sister Agnes was a nun who has, from Scotland, who fled Scotland and brought Sorsha here to the United States, and she's still kind of under her care. So Sister Agnes is in the picture. She's a DMPC. Actually, she doesn't appear as a DMPC on here, but she is a character that is in play, even if she's not a DMPC per se. She is in play by virtue of Puka's psychological attachment to her. She has a susceptibility to cold iron because she is Fae. Okay, it's uncommon because it has to be, unprocessed iron, but it is in play. And she's kind of unlucky. She's had a rough life, I guess. So that's gonna factor in interesting ways. All right. So there you have it, Puka. Pretty tight concept that started off kind of all over the place, but just came together really, really nicely. Character number 4, Resin, made by Andrew. Andrew is a new player, right? The other 3 folks whose characters I've described are people who are playing in the Sentinels of Justice. So they've made characters for this game before, and they're in that sense they're veterans, right? Andrew is a longtime player with our group. He loves the superhero genre. He's played old versions of Champions before, but he's played in just every kind of superhero game that we've ever done. He didn't want to play in Sentinels of Justice because he doesn't love that era, like 1930s, 1940s superhero comics. He's not a big fan of the aesthetic, but he was all in for getting involved in this particular game. So let's take a look at the 3-corner sheet. Powers wise, you see a broad range of things here. The ability to stretch, invulnerability to electricity, limited density control, size alteration, greater strength, the ability to flatten oneself, the ability to glide, the ability to bounce, the ability to kind of become kind of liquid or at least malleable, right? Refraction, I guess, of light. That was all in the powers section. In the person section, we see his codename is Resin. His origin is that Polymer engulfed his son to protect him during an explosion which killed his mother. Upon engulfing his son, the radioactive meteor stone that mutated his father reacted to his shared DNA, giving him almost identical powers. As a young boy, when his father became Polymer, he idolized him and thought one day he wished he could be a hero. Then his dad went rogue. It shattered the son's illusion of his father, or sense of who his father was. and he now wants to make up for his dad's wrongdoings, right? So it's kind of like the invincible dynamic, right? He's just started attending college. He's majoring in chemical engineering. And then let's go to problems, and I'll comment on the whole thing. So problems. He's vulnerable to cold because it makes him brittle. His father, Polymer, is a former hero arrested for excessive force and later vigilantism, and then turned mercenary for hire and even crime. He's new to his powers, so he doesn't know their full extent. And he's got a secret identity. So we've been playing superhero games for a really, really, really long time, right? And Polymer, that you see referenced here multiple times, is one of Andrew's characters from Mutants and Masterminds game, actually, originally, that we played. Polymer was indeed that. He was a hero, but he was really mercenary. Think of like a big, muscly, plastic form. He was always stuck in his hero form, so he didn't have a regular human form. He was just like this, like this plastic golem, for lack of a better word. And he was really, really strong, and he could stretch his body and stuff like that. And he was kind of see-through. And he did start off as a hero, but when we were running Mutants and Masterminds, they went to an evil dimension where there were evil versions of all the characters, and we learned in that adventure that Polymer was just for hire, right? Like he wasn't even pretending to be a hero. He would do anything as long as people paid him enough for it. And I guess what Andrew decided was that this is a version of that character. Andrew understands that we're not playing in the same campaign world where his original Polymer existed, but I guess he's envisioning this as kind of an alternate dimension version of Polymer, where he was a hero who then went rogue, and now he's added the whole element of his son here. So this is more background tied to existing lore than I perhaps envisioned for a Champions Now brainstorming session, right? I think one of the good things about the 3-corner sheet is if you approach them with just like, I'm going to be thinking about impressionistically what my character's like, and I'm just going to put down a few little deets here in these corners and then let a new hero emerge into a world that we're going to craft by virtue of the character creation process and the way that other people interact with it. So we don't have a pre-existing lore that we're trying to be tied to or anything like that. That's the way I usually see Champions Now working. But here we have a player who's new to it, who is thinking about pre-existing lore from another game. But you know what? First of all, I didn't say anything about that. I didn't try to course correct Andrew because, again, I'm trying to be even more hands-off in terms of the processes than I was the first time around. But also, I didn't feel like Andrew's use of the lore got in the way, because he wasn't trying to actually make it that old character. He was just trying to riff off of, he kept that stuff that happened in other campaign as kind of a fuzzy backdrop that we didn't have to slavishly be true to create a new hero who had issues with somebody like that version of Polymer, right? So no harm done. It's a little more detail that I envision in a 3-corner situation, but not anything that was game breaking or anything like that. So I got the character. So let's take a look at the hero sheet and what we did with that. This time, let's start with the situations. I know for the last couple of characters, I started with the powers and the characteristics, but that's because those characters presented particular challenges in terms of the powers, especially. So that's why I started there. But usually with any Champions Now character, I first go to the situations, which are really the most important thing on the hero sheet, certainly for the Game Master. Alter Ego. This is a character who has a normal form that is truly normal. No powers, no abilities, beyond human or anything like that. And he can turn into resin. That's something that makes him different from Polymer. Voluntary and involuntary. So in a stressful situation, I could initiate the transformation. And he does maintain all his skills when he transforms. He is enraged upon seeing his father, likely and extreme, all out. He's maintaining a secret identity. Psychological, daddy issues. Happens a lot, irrational. So whether or not his dad is in the picture, he has issues around his relationship with his father. They're going to manifest, and it could lead to irrational actions. He is distrustful of law enforcement. And I think this is more an expression of the character's youth and college age sort of exposure to activism and different ways of thinking, and less, I think, having to do with the stuff that we saw on the three-corner sheet. He's also distrustful of the 1%. So he's a young person who's questioning the world around him in these particular ways. These are all stated opinions. It's his politics, essentially. And then he has a side effect that is tied to the use of one of his powers, which we'll get to in a moment. Why don't we jump to his powers right now? So basically, it's interesting here too, in terms of a special effects kind of thing. A lot of the stuff that he had on there, in terms of malleability and the ability to flatten himself, the ability to do these things, we went over some options in terms of components that could get at all those different manifestations, but we quickly came to the conclusion that a lot of what was on the three-corner sheet was actually an expression of special effect. Basically, this guy is made of a see-through kind of plastic resin. He can stretch and stuff like that, but the specific configurations he take don't necessarily merit a component. It's all mostly just visual, different expressions. His ability to bounce, for instance, is just maybe part of his gliding or part of his running even, right? We can just say that it's looking that way, but the effect of it is already governed by his basic movement or his gliding ability. We got him the resin body elemental control, and we then bought these powers. Shape distortion, defined simply as his ability to stretch. Gliding, so the ability to maybe, jump off of something and turn into some form of glider or kite or whatever. 10 hexes, so that's flight, 10 hexes. Body compression, he did want the ability to kind of become small and kind of thick, so he got a body compression of shrinking at 4. And resin blob, where he can basically take a chunk of his own body and throw it as an entangle. And when he does that, though, he's diminishing his physical form, which is why he has the side effect 2d6 blast when he uses resin blob, right? So he'll take 2 dice of damage as he rips a piece of himself off of himself and throws it at somebody to entangle them. And then in terms of his characteristics, pretty straightforward. He's strong, can lift like a car over his head with no issue. In that way, he's a lot like his dad. His dad, I think, would be stronger. And then, a very resistant, he's got 10 resistant defense, for a total of 20. And other than that, the remarkable thing about his characteristics are really his strength and his resilience in terms of his defense. And so there you have it. That is resin. Now, I have one more character that has been completed, and that is Jen's character, High Voltage. But I am not going to discuss that character today because Jen couldn't play in the first session. And so I wanted to reserve this for the 4 characters that we're going to see in action in the next video. Jen is likely to play in the second issue of the Mavericks. So I will go through the same exercise at the top of that video. And the same for Adolfo. Adolfo made a character as well. But actually didn't make a character. He did a 3-corner sheet as well. I will wait until Adolfo actually completes the hero and plays before I present that character, which hopefully will be soon. All right. So thank you for sticking it out to the end here. Next time will be the play report. Until then, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.